Hey, Jonathan Klee here with Vox Day Community in Belton, Missouri. Welcome to Vox Live. Me and Levi have been doing this little podcast here, or video. What's it called? A vlog? Is that
Sure.
what people call these?
Sup vlog.
This is our third vlog together. Yeah, you might notice we got a little different setup, trying to make the audio and video better for everyone at home. And today we are talking about philosophy, so I'm going to throw that to Levi with a question of why philosophy, Levi?
Philosophy is kind of a passion project that I stumbled into. I read a lot of theology, and so philosophy are oftentimes very interwoven with each other. Philosophy, I wanted to spend some time talking about specifically because as I've been reading philosophy, I've discovered that the church has had a very long history with philosophy, sometimes very, very positive, other times very, very negative. And so when you look at the church's history and you look at their history with philosophy, there's like a perfect parallel line of when the church is doing very well on a global scale and really, I feel like, embracing the ministry of Jesus. They are often very deeply connected to philosophical readings. At other times, when the churches have made some of the biggest mistakes or blunders in church histories, are times where they say that if it's philosophy, it needs to be rejected and even held like book burnings to get rid of philosophy, and it led to a lesser, shallower way of thinking and life and religion. So I wanted to spend some time shining light on something that has brought out the best in the church at times.
That's awesome. Hey, so I guess the next question that comes to mind would be, why should somebody take this class or watch a video? Why should a believer, someone who's trying to seek and follow Jesus, love others better, why should we study philosophy?
That's a great question. I think two reasons. Number one, if you've attended Vox University before, you've heard me say that everyone is a theologian because everyone has a theology on everything. The issue is we just don't spend a lot of time thinking about our theology. We just have it, and we only know it when people disagree with us. Philosophy works the same way. We all have these preset ideas on what is good and what is bad and what is moral and immoral and right and wrong, that if we don't spend some time looking back and thinking about and thinking critically about why we know what we know, we're oftentimes led astray. The second reason is because of a great quote that Socrates says, where he says, all philosophy is learning to disagree with respect. And I love that. It changed the world and how the world on a global scale talked to one another. And I think if we're wanting to share the love of Jesus well or just embody Christianity, we have to know how to disagree respectfully and how to see the best in other people, even when we don't agree on the same things. Or if we want to maybe sway someone into believing what we believe and we're not able to disagree respectfully, they're not going to think highly of us. So that's the main reason behind the introduction of philosophy class.
Yeah, I love it. I think that we know that God is present in everything, and that means he can be present and teach us something from philosophy in these old writings. And I think that just a good illustration that I've heard, and it might have even been heard Rustin tell somebody else this, that God's presence is like oxygen. It's like the air that we breathe. We can't see God, we can't see air, but we just breathe and we don't have to think about it. I think that's just a good illustration that God is in all of this, and he can teach us something, and it can also help us to learn, like you said, how to talk to others about what they believe.
Yeah, I love it. I also love it because that's a segue. Come to Vox University tonight if you're watching today, or sometime other time if you're watching in the future, because it won't be today, it'll be later, because that's how time works.
Yeah, that's not confusing. Right?
That's not confusing at all. Just let it go. If you study philosophy, it'll be less confusing, though. But the very first philosophical idea actually involves breath and what is the invisible forces in the world. So come tonight if you're watching it today, which is March the 7th of 2023, because we'll talk about that. It'll be great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. You want to show us your books there?
Yeah, so I've got a stack of books. These are just some recommendations for different areas of philosophy to study. One of my favorite things about Vox is people here like to read, and so whenever people are doing a series or a sermon series or just in conversations, I feel like I'm asked all the time, oh, what books are you reading, or where'd you read that from? So I want to get ahead, if you will, of those questions and just recommend a stack of books and a stack of books which I don't have in front of me, but you can find at your local library or half-price books clearance section, because that's where I find most of mine. It's great. So the first is if you want an overview of philosophy. Oftentimes when people are introduced to a new thing, especially something like philosophy, like I remember taking philosophy classes in high school. I don't know if you had to take any, but took
remember.
like an intro to
I don't remember much
philosophy.
about school.
It's probably closer for me than you. That whole time thing came back. But in college or high school, like an overview. Same thing like with art or whatever. People tend to know the word, but not much about the subject, and so they want like an introductory textbook for an overview of the subject. So I brought two, not necessarily to recommend, but more as just an example, because there are dozens of books out there that will say something like a short history of philosophy and try to walk you through all the different eras and transitions and the major important people over the thousands of years philosophy has been written. And so while there are lots out there, there are two things that I always like to look for when I'm deciding which philosophy overview book to get. The first is always to look at the author. This is by Peter Gibson. And if you have a smartphone, just give that guy a quick Google search and see what are his credentials to write about something this deep and this vast. And after I bought this book, I then Googled Peter Gibson and found out he doesn't have a whole lot of credentials. And this book was very okay. It was kind of an overview. I felt it skipped a lot. It was very dry reading. But that's the importance of knowing who you're reading from.
Gotcha. What a glowing recommendation.
So I said it's not a recommendation, but it's a how to find a book I would recommend.
Gotcha.
So it's very B-. It's a good first book, Peter Gibson. Nicely done.
All right. B-.
Very B- book.
Peter.
But this is the much better thing to do as well, which is another crux that I fell into. Whenever you're getting a philosophy book, always open it up to the introduction page and just read what topics that author considered important enough as an overview. And something that this book does that a majority, or at least a very large amount of overview of philosophy books do, is there is absolutely no mention of Eastern philosophy, which I think is very important, and to ignore an entire section of the world and their philosophical development, I think undoes a lot of the topic. And so I would much more highly recommend something like The Philosophy Book, Big Ideas Simply Explained. Because this is not only a very credited author and group, but also includes Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy in all of this.
I think I'm screwing things up here. Are these two not in our list?
They're not in our list.
Okay.
I told you that before we started, but it's all right.
Sorry. Back to the Vox logo.
Back to our regularly scheduled programming. But another thing I really like about this book is philosophy can be very, very dry at time, and it's difficult to follow along and make sure that you're keeping up with the ideas. This book would be a highly recommend because it's filled with pictures, and I love picture books. But it'll have a quote of like the major point that the person is making. There's lots of flow charts that is like, they believe this, and if they believe this, you have to believe this and not this. And it visually is very interesting, so it makes it, for me, easier to digest as a visual learner. So when you're wanting to get an overview philosophy book, make sure it's a credited author, and then make sure that in the overview, it is an overview of what you actually want to read about. Is that a fair statement?
Yep.
Pretty good guidelines for searching for a philosophy book. But in terms of specific eras of philosophy, if you're coming to the Vox University class, we have 4 weeks. We're going to be talking about Greek, Roman, Christian, and then Eastern philosophy as different branches and also timeline of study. And so a couple Greek books. Greek books are going to be very difficult to read. There's also lots of translations out there, just like there's tons of translations for the Bible. It's all in Greek, and to translate it into English and in that same time period means that there's going to be different disagreeing texts on what does it even say. The other downside is Romans did not like Greek philosophy, and so when the Romans took over, they burnt most of the Greek philosophy works. So sometimes it's really confusing because you'll be reading a book by someone and they'll say something like, "We've already spoken about virtue," and you're like, "Did I miss a chapter?" And I would Google search it. It's like, oh, that whole book on virtue that he's talking about was destroyed, and we don't actually know what he's talking about. So just be aware that there's going to be big gaps of missing information, and that it might be a little bit difficult to read, but it's still some really valuable information out there. 2 starting books that I would recommend. Number 1 is The Last Days of Socrates by Plato. Plato is a huge name in philosophy, particularly Greek philosophy, and so is Socrates. Plato was a student of Socrates, and Plato is actually the reason we know most of Socrates. Socrates didn't really write much of anything. Plato wrote what he heard Socrates say. So if you want to know what Socrates was saying, you have to read the works of Plato. So that's one recommendation. The other one, and a very, very different style of philosophy, is the book On Happiness by Epicurus. This book is fascinating because it's not really a book, it's a compilation of writings. Epicurus is one of the most prolific writers in all of Greece, and this is every single thing we have that he's written, because that's how much was destroyed. He wrote tomes of volumes, and this is all that's left, is this one little bitty book. Wow. And not only that, the majority of the book is just bullet points, and it's his quotes that other people said he wrote. So if you want to read something that will make you sound smart, you can say, well, I've read the entire work of Epicurus, and it's less than 100 pages, and it's mostly bullet points. But it's a great way to just start getting into the process of reading philosophy, on my opinion at least, is to ease into something easy, and this is a great starting place for Greek philosophy. How are we doing on time? Life good? Mm-hmm. Nice. I don't want to sound like I'm too boring and droll, but we'll find out. Moving into Roman, I keep on wanting to say theology. I'm in one track mind, man.
In a way.
In a way, it's all connected. Roman philosophy was huge on Stoicism, and there's no book better to capture Stoicism than the book Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is one of my all-time favorite books ever written, not just for philosophy. I cannot recommend this book enough. It's a weird, unique oddity in history, because this book should not have existed. It was a private collection of Marcus Aurelius, who was the emperor of Rome, his private thoughts and what he viewed as most important that he never wanted anyone to read. It was his diary. And he wanted people not to read it so bad, he even wrote it in other languages and would write different words in different languages and had a whole code so people wouldn't read it. And now it's mass-produced and is a New York Times bestseller. So it's unique in history. If you want to know what a Roman educated, trained philosopher thought was the most important ways to lead a nation and your own private life and to live a good and full and complete life, it is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's a phenomenal book, one of the best of all time. Can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, Levi did teaching with the staff during one of our staff meetings, just picking out things from Meditations and Marcus there, of just good ways to lead your life. And although he wasn't a believer, they were all very Christian things that we should all be doing to care and love for others and take care of ourselves.
Yeah, it's one of the best books. It feels very much like you're reading Proverbs if you're a Bible person, because it's just almost poetic rules of life to live a healthy, full life. It's excellent. Can't recommend it enough. Additionally, if you can't get your hands on this, there's a author and podcaster out there by the name of Ryan Holiday, who does a podcast called the Daily Stoic Podcast by Ryan Holiday. He's written 4 or 5 New York Times bestsellers. His whole life is dedicated to the Stoics. What's crazy is he's my age, actually. It's weird. He's a huge author, wildly successful. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with my life, but he seems to have it figured out. But he does these really cool podcasts every single day. They're 10 minutes long. And I jokingly call them, they're an atheist's devotional. Because it
just sounds like he has no life, not that he's much more successful or cooler than you.
Listen.
Daily podcast.
But they're really cool, because he'll literally just read a page from Meditations and be like, today we're going to read this. We're going to turn to chapter 4, verse this, like you would a Bible verse. Read it, explain how to apply it to your daily life, and he's like, now go out and be a better person. And it's like, if you just had a Bible study and never mentioned God, it is that podcast. Huh. It's really, really cool.
Makes me want to do a daily devotional Bible study podcast.
I would love for you to do that.
Okay. I'll be down here tomorrow morning.
All right. But yeah, check out both those sources. They're great. He's on Instagram. He's a great resource. He has lots of books on Stoicism. It's a great place to get started in philosophy. It's actually how I got started. I literally just saw him on an Instagram reel and was like, this guy's pretty cool. Follow. And then started listening to his podcast and read Meditations and some of the books he recommended. And it was awesome.
Cool.
It's good stuff. Next is Christian philosophy. Christians and philosophy has a strange history. We're going to go into it all in depth in Vox University, so make sure you attend that. But 2 places to start. Number 1 is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This is jumping thousands, plurals of years into the future from the books we were just talking about. This is a great place to begin philosophy because C.S. Lewis is so classically trained in philosophy. The way that he writes mirrors other philosophical texts. And the way he lays out an argument and draws you into it and uses imagery is all very philosophical. So this is a great blend, in my opinion, of Christian living and philosophical thought. Doesn't get much better than Lewis, specifically Mere Christianity. Great place. If you're on the fence of this whole philosophy thing, this is the number one place I would recommend starting. The other, I don't have a copy of the book here.
Oh. No, I was just thinking that's great. I think people need a stepping stone sometimes. They need just a way to get into it. So
yeah, it's the best way to get into it. It really is. Because it's how he came to faith, right? It was through philosophy and critical thinking. It led him to it, and so that's how he leads his readers. It's a great place to start. The other is if you would like a 1,000-page, 1,000-year-ago document by Christians, there's the book Confessions by St. Augustine. Is a really excellent, deep, dense, hard-to-read tome of Christian philosophy. If you are really committed, that's kind of more of a warning than a suggestion. But it's a great place to think of how Christians filled the void of philosophy. For about 1,000 years, the church outlawed philosophy. And so great Christian pastors and thinkers filled the role and void of that philosophical thought. And he was very much one of the voices of giving critical thinking and sound reasoning to good doctrine. So St. Augustine is kind of a personal hero of mine, and Confessions is one of his good books. So
yeah, I wonder, maybe you could be one of our saints for our November series, or maybe he has. Rustin's done a lot of the Saint series, so I'm unsure.
Yeah, no, I almost brought up, maybe I'll talk about him in the Saint series, but I'm like, I think Rustin talked about it. I don't, it's fine. It's fine, I mumble into the past.
We don't have to remember everything. Go ahead.
Last but not least is Eastern philosophy. Eastern philosophy is another one, kind of like that complete work of Epicurus, because in Eastern philosophy, paper was a very scarce resource, so what was written was extremely concise and bullet point information. And so you can read a lot of Eastern philosophy very, very quickly, but it takes a long time to unpackage and process and give a lot of thought to it. So two really good Eastern philosophy books that I would recommend. The first is the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. If you want any promo for why you should read the Tao Te Ching, it is the #1 inspirational point for the Force in Star Wars and Yoda here on our cover. So Yoda was inspired by Lao Tzu. How cool is that?
Great. May the Force be with you, Levi.
They literally say, "May the Tao be with you." And I mean, it like when you're reading this, you're like, "Am I reading a Star Wars book?" Hang on. Anyway, that's probably insulting to Taoism, but it's a great place to start. It's very similar to Meditations, except this was meant to be read. It was a teacher's final lessons to his students. It's less than 100 pages, and most of the pages is art. So that's a whole page.
Yeah, that's something I could read.
Yeah, no, I picked this up not knowing this. I'm like, I guess I'll read this month, and finished it. I'm like, I guess I'll read that today.
Yeah.
And it was done.
That's good.
But this is very much like reading Proverbs or Psalms in the Bible. Like, it might be a quick read, but if you read it quickly, you're not reading it well. So slow down, fully immerse yourself in it, allow yourself to really think through the thoughts that they're presenting, and it'll change your life. It's really good. The next is kind of on the opposite end. Tao Te Ching is one of the greatest Chinese philosophy books. The Book of the Five Rings is one of the greatest Japanese philosophy works. The writer, I'm going to try to pronounce the name correctly, is Miyamoto Musashi. What's cool about Miyamoto is he is the believed greatest swordsman to have ever walked the earth. He has more than 60 confirmed sword duels and all of them victories. Began sword training when he was 13. Invented a lot of like the samurai code, and so he wrote this book as like pillars of life, and how when we think of samurais, oftentimes we kind of think of this fictional version of like a shame and honor bound code. A lot of that is inspired by this Book of the Five Rings, and it's how to live your life, he calls it, as a way of art to honor your past. And so it's a system of living that whatever you do it to your best, and you do it with art and beauty. And it's something that we even kind of lean into here at Vox, of flourishing and believing that beauty will save the world. Ironically, it is a swordsman that wrote that in Japan. So it's also another one. It's not as short as the Tao Te Ching, but it's short. It's easy read. It's really fascinating. It's also weird because you'll be reading about he was huge on calligraphy and art and like how to make inks that represent best and can bring you into honor. Next chapter, here's how to wield a sword most effectively, and you're like, hang, what book am I reading here? And it's both like an instructional code of how to fight and also how to live. It's really interesting. High recommendation there for Book of the Five Rings.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Levi.
So that's enough reading
Yeah.
that you should get through at least the end of today of Vox University. Hopefully the whole month. And hopefully even longer. The goal of this is to give everyone who's watching this and will later attend the class, hopefully, some bibliography of what went into creating Vox University, where to turn if you want more information, or if you're just stumbling across this on YouTube and want a good book recommendation. All of those are excellent places to start to begin to think more critically and live more beautifully into the world of philosophy.
Great. Awesome. Well, yeah, I hope lots of people come. It's every Tuesday in March. This is 2023, so maybe we'll do a follow-up at the end of this and maybe wrap up another Vox Live with a wrap-up of philosophy in a month or so.
Yeah,
Who knows?
we sure
Maybe
might do that. I don't know.
Just making stuff up here. We'll see where it goes. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in.
Peace. Yep, didn't know how to wrap that up. Oh well.
It was good.